I do apologise, Michael. Right, welcome to today's Standards Committee meeting on Wednesday, the 9th of April 2025. It is 10 o'clock. And we have, I think I should just go to apologies and substitutions first. Are there any, Bethany?
Thank you, Chair. I've received apologies from Councillor Anne Oxley, which is the Vice Chair of this committee, with Councillor Goldman substituting. I've also received apologies from David Irvine, Jane Watts and Sue Galone, who are 3 of the 4 Council's independent persons.
Lovely, thank you very much. I think before I go on to minutes of the last meeting, I think I will introduce everybody. Welcome to Mrs. Gosling, who is our independent person for today. Councillor Bernie Goldman, who is standing in for Anne Oxley. Councillor Codling, who is a new member onto our committee. Councillor Alexander, Councillor Land, who appears not to be here. Councillor Talbot and Councillor Henderson, and our officers are Mrs. Lisa Hastings, Mrs. Hayes, Mr. Simmons, Mrs. Bunce, and our the ladies that keep us going, Bethany Jones and Katie Coppenall. Thank you. Right, let's go on to the minutes of the last meeting. I'm assuming you've all read them and inwardly digested. And if you have, can I have a proposer and a seconder, please? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Talbot and Councillor Henderson. And do we all agree? Excellent. Thank you. Right. Any declarations of interest?
Could I raise something from the minutes?
Yes, of course, Councillor Talbot.
Quite a number of times here, it mentions, one of the things I mentioned at the last meeting, which is in the minutes, the requirement under our proposed planning protocols that certain officers above a certain level, their applications would have to come before the planning committee. And I raised at this meeting, and I've raised it at 2 other meetings elsewhere, that doesn't that in some way infringe the arrangements we have where members and officers don't have to make public their private address? Because if, for argument's sake, let's say the Deputy Chief Executive or any other officer of that level has to make a planning application, then instead of his address being Tendering District Council Town Hall, his address is his own private address. And I just wondered, and I've said it so nobody else seems to see the point, doesn't that make them vulnerable if we're having to put their private address out in the minutes of a meeting as part of it, for somebody who's annoyed about something else to go round and start throwing bricks through his window or something? I just feel that that's something we ought to look at, either in some way by disguising the name of the individual or something. I know I'm abusing it. It's not strictly a matter arising in that sense, but I do feel it is something, and it doesn't seem to be to sink in. I don't know, it's not for me to protect the officers particularly, but I suppose in a roundabout way I am protecting that little bit of privacy that each of us enjoy, councillor or officer. If you want to make your address public, you can do, but if you don't, my address can be, it's not, I have my home address as it happens, but it can be St Joseph Parish Council, my address, or Tendering District Council. And I just wonder whether anything is going to be done about it, or is that dead business now?
Thank you. Mrs. Hastings.
Is that better? You might regret that. So thank you, Councillor Talbot, for your question and the point that you've raised, and as you've stated, you have raised it before. The current position, which I understand was agreed by full council at its last meeting, actually reduces the number of officers that this would apply to. So the position prior was that all officers who were putting forward applications, planning applications, would have gone to committee. So what we have done is we've actually reduced the number of officers that requirement would apply to. So it was only the senior officers now and those within legal services. I completely take the point that that means disclosing somebody's address in public. That's the position when you make a planning application on an address. That's a natural event. As I've mentioned before, we have had instances where upon a planning application being put forward by an officer, a member of the public decided to abuse that information, and we dealt with it accordingly. So I appreciate your concern, and but because of the process where planning applications do disclose addresses for that simple fact, and we have to maintain openness and transparency, and we also have to show that senior officers cannot influence the outcome of their planning application by them being determined by officers. When you put all of those into account, what we have done is believed to be the most reasonable and proportionate response, so that it only applies now to senior officers and legal services team. Obviously, if there was a number of incidents as a result of that, then the council, with its duty of care, would have a look at it, definitely. And we do owe a duty of care to our staff. So I suppose I would just like to reassure yourselves that we're not doing anything unusual, and we're trying to protect the majority of the staff as much as possible, and we'll put some provisions in place for if a senior officer or a member of legal services was impacted in any way.
Does that answer your... Does that answer... Oh, that doesn't work either now.
Yeah, it does. It's very full. I took it as the answer, but I think it should go on record. That was my point. It will now appear in the minutes of the next meeting that the matter was raised and answered.
Thank you, Councillor Talbot.
No. There's no red light.
Does it? Yeah, it's working. Maybe just need to bring it forward.
Oh, doesn't it? Oh, right, okay. Apologies. That's better. Right, okay. Any declarations of interest? It's not.
It is on.
Yeah.
No, let me just show. This is the same microphone as Councillor Wiggins is using, so the microphone is working. So, yes.
Maybe I have to talk into it a little louder. Okay, right. Okay, any declarations of interest? None? None. Okay. Questions on notice pursuant to Council Procedure 30, Rule 38? Bethany? No. Thank you. Right. We will go now to the first report, A1, which is report on declarations of interest and associated matters, which can be found on pages 13 to 20. And I believe it's Mrs. Hayes. Mrs. Hayes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members and IP. The first report is the annual report on declarations of interest and associated matters, and that's to present you with an overview on the register of and declarations of interests made by members from the 1st of April 24 until the 31st of March 25. In line with the committee's work programme, this is an annual report to yourselves covering that period and provides statistics on the number of declarations of interests made at meetings, the number of offers of gifts and hospitality that members have registered, and updates to the members' register of interests. Under the Register of Members' Disclosable Pecuniary Interests, a dispensation for all district members was granted by the Monitoring Officer for the purpose of formal confirmation of council tax amounts for 25-26 at full council. Declarations of interest at meetings. Members are required to declare their disclosable pecuniary interests, other registrable interests and non-registrable interests, and those are recorded on the committee system, and again they're declared by councillors for that period, covered within Appendix A of this report. For declarations of offers and receipt of gifts and hospitality, there's been one recorded declaration made by a district councillor during this period. And with regard to members' register of interests, at the conclusion of the May 23 district, town and parish council elections, members received relevant disclosable pecuniary interests and other registrable interests form as part of their induction procedure, which they were to complete and return to the monitoring officer for inclusion on the council's website and central register. Registration in the obligations to disclose DPIs, other registrable interests and non-registrable interests, and the effect on participation was covered in mandatory Members' Code of Conduct training delivered by the monitoring officer. And in line with the requirements of the Council's external auditors, an annual reminder this year has been sent out to all district members to ensure that their interests are up to date, and this work remains ongoing. And the table of members' declarations of interest made at Council, Cabinet or Committee meetings from the 1st of April 24 to the 31st of March 25 can be found at Appendix A. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Mrs. Hayes. Councillors, anything you'd like to? Oh, forgive me.
Just wanted to support the report, but also to state two additional points in relation to the update you've received. It was the request that comes out from Debbie Bunce on behalf of myself in relation to members confirming that their interests are up to date, which is a requirement of external audit, unfortunately takes several reminders to members to respond to. And as in the last report from external audit, we actually had 2 members that, despite receiving several reminders, still did not respond, and that was picked up by external audit. So as Mrs. Hayes has said, we are going through that process at the moment, and it would be good if the Standards Committee could support that piece of work and remind members that they should be responding to the request that external audit ask us to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Hastings. Councillors, any questions? Mrs. Gosling, is there anything you would like to ask?
Please, or sorry, microphone. I don't know whether people get invitations to football matches and things that they have to declare seem to be rather badly off on offers. It's just that elsewhere I've sort of seen that councillors have declared that they've been offered tickets to food festivals or celebrations, and they've declared them.
We have the same code of conduct that other authorities have in Essex in relation to the model code of conduct, so it's the same as others. We also issue guidance to our members on what to declare and not declare with regards to gifts and hospitality, and it is down to members to declare those. It's quite possible that in other councils more events go on where councillors are invited to and get offers of more hospitality than tendering does, but
bad luck.
yeah, but also, you know, these matters, you know, they must relate to the business of the council as well. So, you know, there is a degree of, you know, does the offer relate to the business of the council? So that could be different, but we send out reminders.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Talbot.
I'm not absolutely certain of this, but I had a funny feeling at the back of my mind that councillors didn't have to declare gifts until they were a certain sum of money. I'm making this up now, but you only had to declare a gift if its value was over £20. There used to be a figure of that order that, oh look, Karen's putting me right, £5 is that. I mean, the fact that my neighbour brings me in a dinner quite often, I don't, for instance, have to declare that. Anyway, I just thought it worth mentioning. I thought there was an upper sum, you know, it's not pedantic. We don't want every single thing that comes a councillor's way.
No, I believe it's £50. It's £50.
That wasn't £5. Oh, I'm sorry, you might have something done that. That's even better.
That's quite a few dinners.
Yeah. So that will cover a bottle of Pusser's rum, won't it?
It is. Yes, go on.
From memory, the one recorded declaration of office and receipts of gifts and hospitality, I actually do believe was a football match in Ipswich. So, yeah, it was, wasn't it? Yes.
Thank you. And those, is there, if someone does, if a councillor doesn't send in anything at all, they fail to do anything, is there anything that you, as officers, can do or say?
If the requirements of the code of conduct are not complied with and a complaint was submitted as a result of that, then it would go through the process, the normal process. We do sometimes get approached by members who just ask for advice, ad hoc advice, and we give them. So it would end up being a breach of the code if it went through that process. To be honest, this probably is less of an issue now than it was previously, and I'm not just talking about tendering, I'm talking about nationally, where developers would take council members out, you know, in relation to the planning applications that they wanted to put forward. But as the first question asked by Councillor Talbot today highlighted, we've been reviewing our planning probity code, which also includes information on gifts and hospitality and lobbying and things like that. So, you know, I think we do quite a lot to make sure that members are informed, and I think most members now would err on the side of caution and not wish to, you know, take those offers anyway.
Thank you very much. Right, if you are all in agreement, I'll read the recommendation and then we can go from there. Right. It is recommended that the committee notes the contents of this report subject to any comments or recommendations that the committee may wish to make following consideration of this report. Can I have a proposer? Thank you, Councillor Talbot.
It's an excellent report, let's just say that at the same time.
Thank you. Can I have anyone like second? Thank you, Councillor Henderson. And do we all agree? Lovely. Thank you very much, members. Right, on to our second report, which is the Standards Committee work programme for, oh no, beg your pardon. Thank you, Councillor Talbot. I'm glad you're on the ball. Mandatory training for members, the annual report, the annual update. Mrs. Hayes, I believe. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This report is to update the Standards Committee as part of your work programme on the position of mandatory training for members and named substitute members of the Council's Audit, Licensing and Registration, Planning and Standards Committee. This reiterates the Council's constitutional requirement to make relevant training mandatory for those members and named substitutes in respect of membership for those committees which provide a regulatory type function, and the report details the training undertaken and attendance to date. There are other training opportunities available to councillors across the council, and access to the Local Government Association's online training portal is available, and that provides quite a range of topics which you can learn about, and some of those are listed below, so hopefully councillors are making use of that and trying to develop their skills in those areas. And the Appendix A contains the Planning Committee, Licensing and Registration Committee training, and also Audit Committee training undertaken during the last financial year, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Hayes. Councillors, any questions? Councillor Talbot.
If I may, you can see I sat in the sun yesterday and read this agenda from start to finish, so I'm a bit euphoric about bits of it. But what did strike me, on page 22, right at the very top, legal requirements including legislation and constitutional powers, mandatory attendance at site visits, etc. What does that mean? Does that mean that every site visit, every single planning substitute deputy member has to attend? What's the range of the attendance here? My little bit here was there's a double the number of members attending.
Thank you. Mrs. Hastings.
Thank you, Councillor Talbot. The mandatory requirement at site visits, as set out by our constitution, states that if a member of the planning committee was going to determine that a planning application, they must have attended the relevant site visit that's been organised. So it doesn't mean that substitutes have to attend, you know, every single site visit. However, if they were standing in on a particular evening for another member of the planning committee, they would have to attend the organised site visit during the day that is organised for those applications. It's a process and procedure this council put in several years ago, and when we had discussions with planning committee members as to the importance of site visits, it was almost unanimously felt that that is a vital part of the determining the planning application, because you get to see essentially get to see the site and ask some questions. So it's mandatory to attend that particular planning applications determination on the committee.
Could I say that that's exactly how I understood the situation was? So what Lisa said is how I always thought it worked. But when you actually read that, what it actually says is mandatory attendance at site visits, briefings and specific training as a prerequisite for members and named substitutes of the Council's audit, licensing, registration, planning and standards is as part of the Council procedure rules, etc. All I would say is that doesn't say, you know, applicable to a particular application or when the individual knows he will be acting as a deputy. It doesn't have that little bit in it. Perhaps I'm being a bit pedantic, I don't know, but it struck me, my note was almost doubles the member.
Thank you. Mrs Hastings.
Thank you, Councillor Talbot, and I take the point, and we will include the clarification in the minutes so that the explanation is included. But yeah, I take the point that you mean if you read it and you didn't know what the process was, it could look something different. So thank you for the feedback. The other thing I was just going to add, if I may, whilst I've got the floor, is that in addition to the mandatory training that members receive, which is the purpose of this report, you also receive a number of updates on different topics and things through the Chief Executive's all-member briefings throughout the year. And it was recorded in the report for the hearing of the Standards Committee last year, but you also had specific training on that hearing procedure prior to the training in the hearing in May. So that's in addition to the contents of the report.
Thank you, Mrs Hastings. Mrs Gosling, is there anything you wish to say? No? I just didn't want you to be left out, that was all. Right, if we all are of one mind, if I read the recommendation and then we can... Are you saying that you wish to speak or that you're proposing? Okay. We might as well have a seconder, please. Thank you, Councillor Codling. And we all agree? Excellent, thank you. Right, okay, now on to our third, which now is the Standards Committee Work Programme, which can be found on pages 31 to 36. And I believe that's Mrs Hayes again. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. You'll be sick of the sight of me by the end of this. This covers the draft work programme for the Standards Committee from the period April 2025 to March 26, and this has been prepared to reflect the activity required falling under the Standards Committee terms of reference. The proposed work programme can be found at Appendix A, and it's also worthy of note at the thank you. You couldn't hear what? Oh, that's on. Can you hear me now? Yes. Okay, where could you not hear me? What was the... Oh, Okay, Chair, if I may, I'll
Of course.
just go through that for the benefit of everyone. This is to present to you your work programme for the Standards Committee from April 2025 to March 26, and the activities reflecting the committee's terms of reference, and that can be found at Appendix A. And then I was just drawing the committee's attention to page 36 at the bottom of the scheduled activities, where it states that we may also need to, the monitoring officer, may need to refer individual matters to the committee for consideration, or any potential additional meetings, for example, against appeals, against dispensations or code of conduct hearings.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Mrs. Hastings.
I have to say, it's not often we have members of our team that can't be heard. So this is quite unusual events today. So I was just going to explain a couple of things on the work programme. You will see that at each meeting you'll receive the update by the monitoring officer covering complaints, which you always have had. But we have included as well updates on national policy changes. There may not be any at each meeting, but what we wanted to do is make sure that we had the appropriate slot highlighted if we get the results of the consultation that has just been completed by the government on changes to the standards framework and potential legislation. So we've put that in there as a marker, so that's to highlight that. In addition as well, something that is new is in October, and it says the role of the monitoring officer. You periodically receive the monitoring officer's protocol, so that's quite usual. However, the administrative responsibilities of the monitoring officer, we would like to do a review of those so that we can enable more officers to be delegated to undertake certain tasks, so that I'm not a bottleneck for things proceeding. And the legislation is quite clear. You know, it's a personal responsibility for me, and there are certain things I have to do by law, but there are certain things that this committee has delegated to me which could possibly be picked up by officers within the team if we trust them to do it. So that's something that other local authorities are looking into as well, and it makes sense to include it. And especially with the emerging local government reorganisation work, it's important, and the Chief Exec and Head of Paid Service is keen that the statutory officers can focus on things that are required for that as well. So it's about balancing our responsibilities. So that was to explain that item in October, and although we've just received a report on mandatory training, we are going to run another mandatory training on the code of conduct in, I think it's June time, because it's been 2 years since we did the last one. So we're just going to run another one, and hence why you're going to get an update on that. So that was just to explain some of the items which were a little bit different to what you've seen before.
Thank you, Mrs. Hastings. Any questions, councillors? No? Mrs. Gosling? Oh, sorry, Councillor Henderson.
Lovely, thank you. No, it's good to have obviously the work plan in front of us. For the mandatory training, is it possible to have dates out quite far in advance, because some councillors are still working councillors in sort of part-time or full-time jobs, to enable more people to attend, because they could perhaps arrange a day off or swap a working day to actually attend? Thank you.
Mrs. Hastings.
Thank you. I think the dates will be agreed by full council at the annual meeting, and then we will get those populated into members' diaries as entries. On this occasion, I'm actually intending to do it probably online and in the evening, because that format works for the all-member briefings, and we get quite a lot of attendance. I wouldn't say maximum, but it's the best way to get everybody in, bearing in mind their work commitments and family commitments and other things. So that's how I'm proposing to do it this time round.
Mrs. Gosling, did you wish to say anything?
Right. It's just as you now have more independent persons than you used to. And in the few years I started, there was one or two of us, and sometimes one of us was ill. And we knew who we were talking to. Now you've got 4 independent people, and if we're all going to be talking to different people, it can be a bit. Luckily, you don't have that many complaints. But when something comes in that doesn't go as far as formal complaints, it seems a lot of different people are talking to different people, which I'm not sure. As I say, I hadn't really thought through whether that's the best way of doing it.
Mrs. Hastings.
Thank you, Mrs. Gosling. With regards to the complaints process and contacting independent persons, it has been for around 3 years, either myself or Mrs. Hayes. So if there were any other officers that matters were delegated to, then the independent persons would be informed. But the current arrangements will continue, where it's either Mrs. Hayes or myself that would contact independent persons. We're not a very big team.
Thank you.
Right, if no one's got anything else to say, shall we go to the recommendation and have a... So, where are we? Get the correct one. Right, it is recommended that the Standards Committee approves its work programme for 25-26. Can I have a proposer? Thank you, Councillor Henderson, and a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Talbot. Do we all agree? Thank you very much, councillors. Right, okay. The next on our agenda is complaints update and national policy changes. And I believe it's Mrs. Hayes again. Mrs. Hayes.
Thank you, Chair. This is the last you'll hear from me, I promise. Can you hear? Just check that you can hear me.
Yes.
Lovely. This is to provide you with an update on the members' complaints. Now, you'll have to stick with me on this, because since the time of writing, there have been developments on some of those, but I shall talk you through them. So the first case that you can see has been closed. The second case has also been concluded. This was one that was investigated by an external investigator, and no evidence of a breach of the Code of Conduct was found. The third case remains ongoing as an investigation with an internal investigator. The next case remains ongoing, and then the next case, on your report it states ongoing. However, since the time of writing, that has developed and is now an investigation, again with an internally appointed investigator. And the last line on your report, That case is now closed with an action of code of conduct training to be conducted by the monitoring officer. The report also states that since the last update, there were 2 new cases. However, since the time of writing, we have received more, so a further 4 complaints have been received, 2 of which refer to the same councillor and are received by the same complainant, but there are 2 separate occasions. And then the next 2 are from the same complainant but refer to separate councillors. And as detailed earlier during the meeting with regard to dispensations, the monitoring officer granted a dispensation for all district members with regard to council tax setting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mrs. Hayes. Mrs. Hastings.
I just wanted to highlight that the town council complaints referenced, and also the parish council complaints referenced, and they in both instances, we're not going to disclose any information, but in both instances we've tried informal resolution previously, and we're now at the stage where that might have worked for some period of time, but now we're seeing repeated behaviours, so that we are having to undergo an investigation. It is our statutory duty to do that. We have no choice, in effect. But what is disappointing from my perspective is that, especially with complaints that are made councillor on councillor at parish level, that they cannot be resolved more amicably, should I say, within the parish council, and we are having to undertake investigations. I don't know what the outcome of those investigations will be, but there is a degree of councillors having to work with each other, and we don't always agree with each other, but we can do so in a more respectful manner. So there is a bit of a theme going on, and it is there's not much we can do about that, but you know, it's a shame, and we will pick this up through the complaints procedure. But yeah, it's just to say it's sort of a bit disappointing, but we have a statutory duty and we have to comply with it. But it's a cost to the council, not only in relation to resources, capacity, but also financially as well. But you know, we carry on. We're not going to not undertake our duty, because that's what we have to do, and we do it properly. But there is an element sometimes of just wish that it could be resolved different ways.
Thank you, Mrs. Hastings. Councillor Henderson.
Yeah, if I could just come back. Can you hear me, everyone? Yeah. It does seem, obviously I've sat on the Standards Committee for some years now, it does seem to be some of these investigations and complaints do seem to be on the rise. Is it something that you are noticing? It has gone up, you know, there used to be an odd 1 or 2, but it does seem, and even from the town and parish level, obviously you say the cost to the council. If it's a town and parish level, us as the district council, we still pick up the cost for that parish level if they don't sort things.
Yeah, Mrs. Hastings.
There is an increase definitely in town and parish council matters. What I would say is that, and I'm not saying this to undermine or criticise town and parish councils any way. You know, I believe in democracy, and it's the process that we all work to, and it's the right thing. But when there are complaints at the district council, we seem to respond to them. I say we, not necessarily me, yourselves as district councillors. You seem to respond to them in a different way, should I say, than town and parish councillors do. That may be because you are a bigger organisation. You're dealing with more issues. You've got a higher risk to your reputation. We've got the local government ombudsman. We've got external audit. We've got all of those different bodies that also look at the way that the council behaves as a whole. And I'm going to go on to some slides in a minute from nationally, just to pick up on a couple of points. At town and parish council level, some councillors are often co-opted on, and they're often or they become interested in a town and parish council because of a certain issue. It's normally a local issue. And then you have town and parish councils that have been working together for a long time, without any disruption, shall we say, and they don't take kindly to new views. And I think that's a theme, and I think there is a responsibility for those town and parish councillors to listen to all views, and to work differently. You know, if I could, you know, I would want to do a lot more work with town and parish councils on behaviours and culture and relationships. But I can't, and, you know, the district council shouldn't have to, in my view. You know, each of these town and parish councils can invest time and money in trying to resolve some of those issues locally themselves. And I hope, and this is my own personal opinion, but I hope that with local government reorganisation, and when the district goes into becoming a unitary, that the standards at the other levels, so town and parish councils, is still, in the majority, is high. The standards are high and conduct is high. But I feel there is a risk that that level of oversight with more possibly devolution of delegation of powers to town and parish councils, with the current situation we've got, there are some behaviours locally that need to improve, and the public are wise to these things, you know. So it's a concern. I'm not. We're not alone. We're not alone in tendering for this at all. You know, this, I speak to monitoring officers locally and across the country, and this is a national issue. You know, there is no oversight of a town and parish council at the moment. You know, the government, local government and social care ombudsman has no remit over town and parish councils. They do have in audit, but only audit for the purposes of their accounts, really. And our audit will look at behaviours and culture and things. So I don't want to make it come across that I don't believe in the good work they do, because I do. But when it goes wrong at that level, it can go very wrong. And it's mainly to do with personalities.
Thank you, Mrs. Hastings.
Any other questions? Okay, yes, we'll taste things.
So for the purposes of the recording, and if anybody was viewing online, these slides will be put onto the council's website, so that they're available to see. Members, I believe you were given a printed copy earlier, and I just want to take you through these. This is what I have presented to the Standards Committee on an annual basis for some time now. I look back over the last 12 months and pick out some matters that may be of interest to you in relation to the terms of reference of the committee. So I look at any cases, any policy changes and any guidance that's out there. It is for information only, but it is I think it's always useful for us to look at what's going on elsewhere. So I'll just run through these with you. So in April last year, there was an investigation into a Welsh city council, and they undertook the investigation, and the position is different in Wales to England with regards to standards. However, whilst the legislation is slightly different, the principles remain the same. And in this instance, they found that all 14 of their town and community councils were failing to publish a compliant register of interest form on their website. And they also revealed that some councils were confusing register of interest with declarations of interest, and that they also found that the quality of some of those forms was very inconsistent, and sometimes they hadn't signed them or put their name on those forms. So it's just a sort of to look at a council that's undertaken a sort of thorough investigation into what's going on in town and parish councils within their area. Debbie, on behalf of myself, does an annual sort of trawl through to see what's out there on town and parish councils at tendering. So we do have a look, and we do write to those councils if we feel that there's something not quite right on their website. So I'm quite satisfied that we do the best we can in relation to that for our local area. There was another council in April last year that received an external auditor's report that ended up being discussed at their full council meeting, which warned that member behaviour continues at times to be poor, and also added that member-officer relations still need to improve. It had been identified as an area of specific weakness in that council the year before in their external audit report, and it was a shame, I think, for those involved to see that despite trying to produce a member officer protocol on relations, which is standard, most councils have it, we have it, they without over a year passing, they'd still not managed to progress beyond a draft document, which is a real shame, and they were having to seek external support to resolve the issue. That sort of goes a little bit to what I was just saying about town and parish councils and behaviours. But the report said that members and officers needed to work more collaboratively, respectfully and supportive, and that too much time was being taken up managing relationships rather than on the delivery. So there was another huge piece of work that came to fruition in May last year, just prior to the general elections, and that was published by the former Department for Levelling Up and Housing and Communities, and they issued best value guidance for on standards and intervention in May. We're a best value authority. We've got responsibilities which are set out there to make arrangements for securing continuous improvement. We must always do that. We must always look to how we can be better, how we can improve the way that not only our processes but the way that we work. That guidance produced 7 themes to define best value. For those of you that may take an interest in some of our cabinet reports, you will see that both the Section 151 officer and myself as the monitoring officer are referring to this document. We are referring to these standards. They are regarded as statutory guidance that you should follow, and unless you believe there's a reason not to. And it sets out characteristics of a well-performing authority and also indicators of potential failure. So that has been quite useful for us as officers to highlight where we're doing well and if there are any areas of potential failure, which we haven't found yet, but we have highlight where it could take place. As I said, there's 7 themes, but for the purposes of this committee, culture is one of those themes. And I've got there a slide which says that the culture of a local authority is determined by an agreed set of shared values, ethics and beliefs, how decisions are made, how members and officers behave, how they interact and how they carry out their roles. I heard a comment last week at a presentation that I was listening to, and I thought it was a really useful statement. You don't make, you can't make a culture. Culture comes about by the relationships and behaviours of people working together equals culture. So you've got good culture, you've got bad culture. Do you necessarily set out to, that's the standard you want to achieve? No, it's what comes, it's the product. Is it? We've got 2 mics now. And you know, I wholeheartedly believe that the culture of any organisation and relationship, you know, impacts what others think of you, how you know you behave. So I'm always really pleased to see that culture is regarded as being so important in a way that an organisation works. And I think it's fair to say that tendering historically went through a period where that wasn't always great. But I'm pleased to say that, you know, the members at the District Council have worked considerably hard on that for over a decade now to improve that. So I think that's a testament to this council, but we should never be complacent about it. So it's good to see that culture's in there. And actually, we've got here that high numbers of standards complaints by members against members being upheld are indications of a potential failure. And again, that goes back to my comment I was making earlier about town and parish councils. There was a interesting, maybe for those of us that were involved in governance, a first tribunal decision in June last year, which looked at whether the information provided by third parties during a code of conduct complaint not the complainant or the subject member, but those third parties that had contributed through the process. An individual was trying also. Is that? Yeah, okay. I think someone's just trying to shut me up somewhere. There's some almighty somewhere. So the individual that was making a freedom of information request to this particular council was not involved in the complaint, was not involved in the code of conduct investigation, but they wanted to find out information about the process. There are several slides there. They go into some detail. I'm not going to read them out. But what was interesting for me was that when the council took the matter initially through its hearing procedure, it didn't do it in Part A, it did it in Part B. And because it was in Part B, they did produce a decision notice following that, and they did produce some minutes of the meeting, but there ended up being quite long and protracted litigation on a member of the public trying to find out what really happened. So I think there is a lesson to be learned that by putting things into Part B, that's the position you put yourselves in, because you haven't done it in an open and transparent manner. The Information Commissioner and the First Tribunal did actually support, though, that the personal data of those individuals involved in the complaint should be protected, and it was personal data and shouldn't be disclosed. But in my view, I think you could still have done that through an open hearing, but keeping some information redacted because it was personal data. So I think there's lessons to be learnt there. You know, this is, as I say, it was a protracted litigation to reach a situation. And in addition, throughout the process, the council decided to keep releasing a bit more information each time. And again, if they'd done that initially, they wouldn't have had to have kept, drip feeding information. So Spelthorne Borough Council, they've been in the news quite a bit over the last year from a governance standards perspective. They found in October last year, following a complaint which was investigated, that the leader of the council had breached the code of conduct and was required to issue an apology to the member of staff. The leader made a press statement saying that they had issued a written apology to the member of staff. However, their situation is different in their council because their hearing is determined by a subcommittee, and the minutes of that subcommittee then go to the main committee. The main committee found they asked in December about the sanction, and they were told that the leader had not apologised to the staff member, and they then publicly said in their meeting, the main standards committee meeting, that they were disappointed that that had not happened and that the matter should be investigated. Then what became apparent was that the leader said when she sent a written apology to the subcommittee during the hearing process, she felt that was sufficient enough to be an apology to the member of staff directly. And the standards committee felt it wasn't because it didn't go to the officer. So you can see there that actions in other councils where there's been sanctions sometimes aren't always followed through. In December last year, you'll all be aware of this, there was the English Devolution White Paper, and in relation to the terms of reference of this committee, they said in that white paper that they were going to consult on reforms to the standards regime. And then, as we are aware, they did consult in quickly thereafter in December. Their consultation was called Strengthening the Standards and Conduct Framework for Local Authorities in England, and this Standards Committee received a draft response to that consultation at its committee in February, and that was sent off and acknowledged. So we will keep the committee updated on that as matters progress through the year. The Committee for Standards in Public Life, which is our sort of national committee that looks at these matters, they also have replied to the consultation, and they back the proposals within that consultation. And they also said publicly that they welcomed it because it was largely based on the recommendations contained within their 2019 report on standards in England. And again, I wanted to reassure you that on a number of occasions you've received products of that review back in 2019 to make sure that we were complying with best practice and standards wherever we could that didn't result in changes in legislation. So essentially that's what we've got to now see what comes out. Will there be any changes in legislation? This case I found, it was a case with a parish clerk who went to the High Court, and she was awarded £20,000 in damages to a parish councillor who had put defamatory marks against her on social media. And the judge said, you know, that you could tell he was consumed with a very strong personal dislike of the clerk, and because he did that on social media, she took a defamation case against him, and she got £20,000 damages. So it's a stark reminder to be careful when using social media. And now we're back to Spelthorne again. This was the one I just mentioned about the leader and the member of staff. The government wrote to the chief exec in March and said that they were minded to send the commissioners in to the council after another best value report found the council to be in a critical financial position, burdened by debt levels, investment risks and governance weaknesses. But I think, again, for the relevance of this committee, they specifically found that the council was failing to comply with its duty, specifically in relation to continuous improvement, leadership, governance, culture and use of resources as described in the statutory guidance. I've got there as a title on this slide, which follows on from what I've just said. Was it really all about the money, or was it about the relationships? Because that's what you find in a number of these best value reports that come through, that there may be issues with finances, but it always goes back to the relationships between those individuals working in that organisation. Whether officers are being naive, too risky, whether members are challenging that in the right way. As we've always said here, it's perfectly acceptable to challenge as long as you do it in a respectful manner. In Spelthorne, there was a particular culture of where members did challenge they were regarded as being abusing their position and being pushed back. So they got themselves into quite a bit of difficulty. So it looks like the commissioners are going into that authority. So I think that's my last slide on that. So hopefully you just found that it's a bit of information really useful, but I think it's also a good opportunity for us as a bit of a health check to see if there's anything we should be doing that we're not doing. I think it's fair to say, you know, we have more time. There are things we'd like to do, but I'm quite satisfied we're in a good place when you look nationally.
Thank you, Mrs. Hastings. Councillors, anything you'd like to ask Mrs. Hastings? Very interesting. Mrs. Gosling? No? I think you're let off. Right, okay. Right, I think we've come to the end of the meeting.
Could I raise something under any other business? I know we don't strictly have that on our agenda, but
Is it something we could pick up afterwards?
it is really, and it might actually, what I want to say, might actually be better afterwards.
I think we were going to have an informal conversation as a standards committee after.
Oh, good.
Okay.
Good. I appreciate that.
Okay, thank you. So I think now we'll formally end this meeting. Thank you very much indeed, officers,